Welcome to the Bible Feed podcast. I'm Dan Weatherall and Paul Davenport is with me again. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Dan. Here we are
Great.
again.
Yep, here we go. Talking about more prophets and actually opening up one of the books of the prophets today for a book introduction. And we're going to be looking at Isaiah. So last time, on the last episode, we looked at the whole idea of the prophets, who they were. We explored how we should read them. We thought a little bit about the context of the covenant, so the whole sort of covenant history of Israel and how the prophets are really key people throughout that history, that they're shaping how we should understand that history throughout the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and that's what we've done. But we need examples now, don't we? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start off with Isaiah. So that's the plan.
Yeah, hopefully we're going to do 2 parts on Isaiah. I think you said last time that Isaiah is too big to do in 1, so we'll do it in 2. It's actually too big to do in 2 as well, really. So
that's very true.
Very much going to be an overview. We'll split it into 2 parts, and then we'll do one on this book of the 12, the minor prophets.
Yeah. Each of which are too small to do in 1, so we're going to do them all in 1.
I don't know, we might end up doing them all individually as well.
Yeah, who knows?
So,
yeah. These are overviews. I suppose with a book like Isaiah, it can seem so daunting because it is so big and quite deep, and it's a prophet, therefore it's difficult. We talked about that last time. So it can seem daunting, and therefore you don't ever look at it. But hopefully what we'll try and do on 2 shortish overview episodes will be enough for you to think, yeah, I'll give it a go. I'll read it, I'll open it, and I'll try and see what it's like. So that's what we're going to try and do. And I want to remind the listener of the model that you proposed of how to get to grips with, or maybe just help understand what we're reading. You gave us a 7-part model with a 7-part acronym.
Yeah.
Which was, in Red Wellingtons, I played Rhythm and Blues, I think.
That's the one, yeah.
Brilliant.
Now,
okay.
At least it's easy to remember. So what I was trying to highlight was that the writings of the prophets, we can categorize the content of what they're doing into sort of seven types of message, 7 types of things captured in that memorable phrase. And so the first one was about the prophets calling out the injustice and the idolatry, often going with unfruitfulness of the land as a result, idolatry and injustice of the people. Secondly, they say, return to God, return to me, and I will return to you, that kind of message. Thirdly, they give warnings of something that is to come if they don't return. And what is to come is captured in this concept of the day of the Lord, but that's got multiple things going on in it. And it's perhaps helpful just to know which part of it a prophet is writing about. And the 4 parts were Israel will be afflicted by a nation, they'll be invaded, attacked. The second part is that nation itself will then be punished for going overboard with what it does to Israel. There's often, in the context of that, a deliverer arises. And then we get to part 6, which is a remnant is restored. And as part of that restoration, there's often talk about blessings coming on that restoration, which bring all nations into those blessings as fulfillment ultimately of the covenant God made with Abraham. So there we have it, the 7 part.
Great. Okay, so we'll be looking out for some of those as we start looking for Isaiah. I should just point out right now, as we record this, there's a bit of a thunderstorm brewing, which feels pretty prophetic. It's the sort of imagery that we get as we read through these things. So we'll see if we get struck down as we go through Isaiah. Okay. But let's start, Paul, with who was Isaiah? Who are we talking about?
Yeah, so right at the beginning of the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So there's there's quite a lot of information there that he's got. His father, his message is about Judah and Jerusalem. So it's that southern kingdom. And it was in the days of particular kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. It's probably mostly in the last two of those, Ahaz and Hezekiah. And therefore, not surprisingly, he's a character that appears in the second book of Kings, where the lives of those kings are described and the narrative about their lives is given. Isaiah appears. He's a prophet. He's a figure that is in and around the royal court. But here we've got 66 chapters of his own writings to go at here.
Yeah, okay. A lot there. And interesting, just reading that first verse of the book reminded me of what our last discussion, we talked about high context. And that these things are assumed. It's not particularly high because at the period of the time, they're well-known things, aren't they?
Mm.
But for us, it's very much, if we're not familiar with the background, like the reign of Hezekiah, then we might miss what's being talked about. So they're really, important bits of information, aren't they? So, and it helps us put it into that timeline. So we outlined a very expansive timeline, and that included within it the Assyrian crisis, didn't it?
Yeah.
Which there was the crisis where the Assyrian Empire was at its height, and that came against the nations of the Levant and came against Samaria, Israel, the northern tribes, destroyed the northern kingdom there, and almost destroyed Judah as well, came very close to it. So Isaiah fits at that time, I think, and it seems like there's a lot going on in terms of prophets at that time.
Yeah, so there are a few books of the prophets. Micah in the Minor Prophets is bang in the same period as well as Isaiah. And it's a really dramatic period. There's a crisis of events that take place over just a few years when this Assyrian invader comes and takes away the northern kingdom. So that kingdom's been destroyed. And then the Assyrians carry on south into Judah and Jerusalem. Actually, they take and destroy a lot of the cities and towns in the land surrounding Judah, in the kingdom of Judah, and they besiege Jerusalem. They lay siege to Jerusalem. And it's like there's some imagery in the Psalms, actually, about it's to the neck. It's like the Assyrians have got a stranglehold on Jerusalem, and it's about to fall. And it's that level of crisis that it's about to fall. But what we find so for example, in Isaiah chapter 1, you get a little flavor of that in verse 7 and 8. And this is an example of the kind of poetic language. Your country lies desolate, your cities are burned with fire. In your very presence, foreigners devour your land. It is desolate, as overthrown by foreigners. And the daughter of Zion is left like a booth in a vineyard, like a lodge in a cucumber field, like a besieged city. You can see that poetic, there's those parallelisms, kind of two statements that say almost the same thing but play on each other to say a little bit more together. And there's this picture of the surrounding countryside is desolate, but there's this city. I don't know, what does a cucumber field look like?
I guess a field full of cucumber plants, Paul.
Yeah. And are they tall?
I don't think so, but I don't know.
No, I don't really know. But
you're asking someone who can't grow anything.
But I think they're quite flat to the ground.
Yeah.
And then you've got this booth, like a shed, in the middle of the field, and it sticks out. It's prominent, and everything around it is flattened, and Jerusalem is left there still standing, like a besieged city. Yeah, and we find out through the history that Hezekiah at this time, not only is his city about to be taken and besieged by this terrible empire of the Assyrians, but he's really sick, and he's about to die himself, and he's about to die with no heir. So it just looks like everything is about to fall for this people of God and their dynasty.
And not just the dynasty, Paul, but the covenant as well, thinking about it, because it's the son of Hezekiah. Is there going to be a continuing king, the son of David?
Which is the line of David.
Yeah. So the covenant is absolutely on a shred, isn't it? And about to be destroyed completely. So very dramatic. So lots going on. I want to just ask you the question about who wrote it. Well, sounds like we've already asked that. Feels like I've already asked that. But, I mean, there are, isn't there, if you turn to any kind of scholarly book or anything that talks about Isaiah in a bit more detail, any commentary or anything like that, you're very quickly going to run into the suggestions of the fact that there are what's often called second Isaiah or maybe third Isaiah, and the way that people who've studied the book have split it into 2 or 3 sections and thought that actually this reflects an earlier writer, maybe real Isaiah, and then the next 2 reflect people who wrote something much later, and it became stitched together. Some of the later parts talk about Babylon, don't they? They seem to talk about a later time period than the Assyrian time period. What do you make of that? What do you make of this question about whether or not it was one individual or some other individuals in the line of Isaiah's sort of tradition, effectively?
Yeah, and we won't spend long on it, but it's important to recognise that proposal is there. Our starting point for this is that there is a God. We have good reasons to believe that there is a God. There is a supernatural, supreme being, and that God is trying to communicate to us through these writings, through these scriptures, through these prophets. And we've got, therefore, a God that is of that nature and able to communicate, wants to communicate, is going to ensure that we have the book of Isaiah that he intended us to have. And it's authoritative at that level, that it's the book of Isaiah that the God who is communicating with human beings intended us to have. And when we look at it in that context, who physically wrote each part of it becomes less critical because God is the source of it. Could be that it's all Isaiah, one Isaiah, and that he produced all of it exactly as we have it now, and that he was able, through being moved by the Spirit or whatever the process of inspiration was, he was able to write about future things that relate to Babylon 150 years later, and people at that time. He was able to do that. There's maybe just a slight nuance just to bring into it, in that Isaiah does say in chapter 8 around some of the things that he said. So in chapter 8 and verse 16, he says, "Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples." And then goes, "I will wait for the Lord." And so there is just this hint that whatever Isaiah produced, whatever he said, whatever was written down, was kept and preserved and passed down through his disciples from generation to generation over the next 100 years or so. And we talked about, didn't we, there's these hints of the sons of the prophets, this community that preserved and kept the writings, and maybe over time put them together and edited them and combined them in different ways that were relevant to their own time. And it could well be that there are writings or things, messages from Isaiah that are picked up by those later generations in the spirit of Isaiah, using the things that he said and making them relevant to the times of the Babylonian crisis, which comes 100 years later. That is a possible explanation. It still means that God is involved in all of that and giving us the writings that he intended us to have. I'll just add one further thing, which is, if it's true that there were 2 different, or more than 2 different authors, and their different writings produced at different times have been stitched together to produce the one book of Isaiah that we've got now, there is no manuscript evidence of those separate parts of Isaiah. So there is no kind of manuscript foundation for saying that there were 2 different books produced at different times, which were then stitched together. And amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is the Isaiah scroll that's very famous, and it's the whole of the book of Isaiah as we have it today.
So no one's ever
seems irrelevant.
Yeah, I think that's important. No one's ever found half an Isaiah as one complete thing. So it's been seen for a very long time as one coherent whole. So that's useful. Okay. It's a little bit like the books of Samuel that we have. Potentially, Samuel is a character and potential author of some of it. Who knows? For only for a short period of time in the book of Samuel, because then Samuel dies, and then the book that bears his name and the second book that bears his name is after his life, but in the spirit of the school of the prophets
Yeah.
that Samuel was head of, it seems. So
Yeah.
that's for another episode on Samuel, but there we
Yeah.
go. Let's park
Yeah.
that. And what we really need to do is dive into this now, Paul, because
Yeah.
there's 66 chapters and we're hoping to do chapters 1 to 39. So
Okay.
there's lots to go through, lots to tackle.
Yeah.
How are we going to do
Strap
this?
in.
Yep. And how are we going to, and why are we going to split it at chapter 39, 40? Why that?
Yeah. And there is a natural split between
good.
chapters 1 to 39 and then 40 onwards. And it's actually the split at which those scholars might say, okay, up to 39 is first Isaiah. But we'll see, I think, when we get into the second section that it's absolutely integrated into the whole. So, yeah, we're going to go up to chapter 39, but we do need to break it up into sections, these first 39 chapters. And what we'll try and do is just very quickly, from each of the sections from chapter 1 to 39, we'll just take some samples, a few verses. Now, I've broken it down into 7 pieces from chapter 1 to chapter 39. Now, we'll maybe just put a link in the show notes to the sort of chapter summaries that we have of each book of the Bible, and you'll be able to see those sections in that summary for Isaiah. So here we go then, seven sections. So first one is 6 chapters, chapters 1 to 6. I've called them prophecies about Judah, but it ends in chapter 6 with a kind of a picture of Isaiah being selected to speak to the people and to the kings of the people. And then we go into chapter 7, and Isaiah does that. He goes and speaks to Ahaz, one of those kings. And there's a few chapters about his interactions with Ahaz. That's taken us to chapter 12. And then we go from chapter 13. We've got quite a bunch of chapters here now. I think there's 11 chapters, chapter 13 through to 23, which are all messages to other nations, not to Israel, messages to other nations that are surrounding Israel. Then we've got to chapter 24, and we've got 4 chapters that are essentially really emphasizing that God's in control. The Lord reigns in Zion is what I'd characterize that. And then another block of 4 chapters, warnings for Judah, this southern kingdom. And then another 4 chapters which are a bit more hopeful. And there's hope for Judah. And then we go into the final 4 chapters, 36 to 39, which is really a historical account. It's more like a historical account. It's less about poetic prophecy stuff, and it's about the reign of Hezekiah, what happened in the reign of Hezekiah. So there we are. Those are our 7 sections that we're going to step through.
Yeah, and that the last section, that the Hezekiah's, what happened in his life, that's mirrored in the Kings as well, isn't it? I think so. That's some of that section is there. So that helps us root it into that history.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go through, like you said, each of those parts of this first section and give us some example verses of what it's generally about. So we just get a sense of it, and we're going to try and work out which of those in Red Wellington's I Played Rhythm of Blues, which of those features we can find. That's what we're trying to do, just so we can make sense of it.
Yeah. So what types of content? So let's try that. And we'll step through these 7 sections pretty quickly doing that. So part 1, the first 6 chapters, prophecies against Judah. It's got several different parts of those 7 types of content. So chapter 1, verse 21, just as an example of how colourful the language can be. How the faithful city has become a whore, she who was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. So there's that. And then let's just focus on chapter 2, 3 or 4 verses in chapter 2, Isaiah chapter 2, which says this: the word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us of his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall decide disputes for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's a good
So that,
section.
yeah. So there's an identical section in Micah. We said Micah was
Yeah, yeah.
parallel with Isaiah. So what type of content we got there?
Yeah, okay, so we've definitely got the blessings. So starting from the end, haven't we? This is blessings to all nations, peace and safety to everyone, that kind of thing. But it's this phrase, isn't it, in the latter days. So it's this, that's helpful to see that. I wonder if there's judging between the nations, whether there's a bit of a sense of judgment on those who've punished, or whether there's a little bit of that. The one who judges will be able to do it. Yeah. So yeah, it's a forward-looking resolution of the covenant, completion of the covenant passage.
Yeah. And it's brought about a situation in which nations that were divided and at war with each other are brought together into a unity. And there's no division anymore between peoples. And there's this mountain of the house of the Lord. There's a mountain kind of elevated above, from which flows out kind of peace and righteousness and justice. I guessed a little flavor of Eden in that description as well.
I think so, yeah.
The harmony that's there.
So it's a good place to start, Isaiah.
Yeah.
So to have a nice picture of ultimately this covenant is going to result in this, but there's a future, or I suppose a lot that needs to be said between now and then. So shall we jump into the next section that you identified and just see what there is there?
Yeah. Okay. So the next section is chapters 7 to 12. So right at the end of chapter 6, Isaiah is appointed to go and speak, and he's sent to Ahaz, and he has these conversations with Ahaz. And so here's some words that he speaks to Ahaz in chapter 7, verse 14. I'm guessing that people will recognize this. Chapter 7, verse 14. Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. So Isaiah talking to Ahaz, the Lord will give you, Ahaz, a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. So there's another part of the conversation in which unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. That appears in chapter 9 as well. And the whole context of this sign from Isaiah to Ahaz is that a child's going to be born, and before that child is old enough to eat solids, then the threat to your kingdom from, I think it's from Syria and from the northern kingdom, that threat will be removed. So it's a promise of you're going to be delivered, and the sign of it is the birth of this son, and it's going to happen before he gets to eating solids.
Okay, great. So you some famous passages there.
Yeah.
That we hear about and we might come across if we read other parts of the Bible, such as the New Testament, like Matthew chapter 1.
Yeah.
We might come across this passage being quoted. But what's really important, I think, I suppose what you're trying to say is put this Isaiah, first of all, in its own context.
Yeah.
And notice what it's about here. And, about Ahaz and the sign to Ahaz and the sign of, what is it? Is this a punisher, a nation that has been afflicting Judah that is now going to be punished? Is that part of what's happening?
Yeah, it's hinting at that, isn't it? That the threat to Israel because of their unfaithfulness and injustice, that God's not going to break the covenant. He's going to remove that threat. And there is this whole debate about the virgin shall conceive.
Yeah.
And this word is in the Hebrew, which is alma, which just means a young woman. So it's not that surprising that a young woman might conceive. But this is a virgin shall conceive. That's something different. And, and we know that's quoted in the New Testament about Jesus. And not just the New Testament using the idea of the virgin shall conceive, but in the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures that Jewish scholars produced, they used the Greek word for virgin rather than the word for young woman.
Okay.
And it's curious as why given that they're not linking it to Jesus at all,
Mm.
why would the Jewish translators use the word virgin in this context? Maybe when we get to a later section, we might see a hint of why they might do that.
Okay, so maybe there's even, before Jesus arrives on the scene, there's something about this being a virgin.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the next section. We said we're going to skip through this quite quickly. What have you got for us in this third part?
So third part is oracles against nations. So this is 11 chapters of this, 13 to 23, and it's quite hard going, to be honest.
Yeah.
But they're oracles against Babylon. So even in this first section, we have pieces about Babylon. Oracles against Moab, which is on the east side of the River Jordan. Damascus, that's Syria. Cush and Egypt, that's down in Egypt, and Sudan, that sort of area. And then Tyre and Sidon. So a whole range of different peoples that are around in the Middle East and relevant to the affairs of Israel. But let's just pick on one few verses in chapter 14, which I think is something that we've referenced before in another podcast in a different context. So Isaiah 14, verse 12, that says this: "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn! How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low! You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." There we go.
So
what do you think of that, Dan?
Yeah, so this is great. These sections against the different nations, they're clearly part of that. These people like Babylon who have punished Israel, they're now to be punished. Someone who has been so proud and arrogant and is almost archetypal proud and arrogant to set themselves up as the Most High, effectively. Try and take the place of God. This
and I
Babylon.
think the episode that we did on it referenced this and said, okay, in the context, it probably isn't a fallen angel because the whole chapter is addressed to the king of Babylon from verse 4 of that chapter. But what is the king of Babylon doing? Okay, he's attacking Israel. He's decimating the temple. He burns the temple, destroys it, takes captives, destroys the nation. But although that is part of what God intended for Israel because of their unfaithfulness, he goes way overboard with it. And not only does he do that, he then thinks, do you know what? I'm as good as God. I'm God in this situation. He's elevating himself to this position of being like God. And it's the king of Babylon in this context. But that becomes a sort of an archetype for human authoritative leadership, imperial exploitation, slavery, all of the things that go with that utterly unjust human behavior. So when we say, okay, Israel are going to be afflicted by a nation, but then God punishes that nation for what they do, it is absolutely just. It's an expression of God's justice because of the way that human authority and power manifests itself.
Yeah, okay. So let's move on to the next bit. So where are we going next?
So we've gone through all those oracles against nations, and we get to chapter 24, and it's really all about God reigns in Zion.
Oh, yeah.
So it seems appropriate, actually, to come after all of that. Yeah. There are these other peoples and leaders that are claiming to be high like God. Actually, no, God is the one in control. God is in charge. So beginning of chapter 24, "Behold, the Lord will empty the earth, make it desolate. He will twist its surface, scatter its inhabitants. The earth shall be utterly emptied and utterly plundered. The Lord has spoken this word." And it's quite, I'd call it decreation language. It's undoing the fabric of creation, of reality. And in Isaiah chapter 25, we read this. So this is a little bit different, kind of coming out of the back of that decreation. We get this in verse 6 of chapter 25. "On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, a rich food full of marrow, of aged wine refined. He will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces, and the reproach of his people he will take away from the earth, for the Lord has spoken. So we've got some different aspects
Yeah.
coming
So
through.
that reminds you of that first section we looked at, Isaiah chapter 2. We've got,
Yeah.
again, this mountain and death destroyed. It's like
Yeah.
war being destroyed, instruments of war
Yeah.
and cruelty
Yeah.
taken away. So that kind of thing. But to get there, we've got the destruction of those who've been punished, well, of Israel and of the nations who are punishing. And then those who are left as well. This kind of remnant, the people left. Because it's very dramatic, isn't it? Chapter 24 is the whole earth is just desolate. But actually, there is a remnant. There is a number of...
But it's not the end. It's just the next turn of the cycle, if you like, when there's a remnant that comes through and is restored. And maybe that time, the next time, there'll be all these great blessings for all peoples on a mountain with all of that plenty and blessing and Eden-like language again.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So just putting that next to the section that we've just had, we've had all these Gentile nations, other nations around like Babylon, going over and with their violence and whatever their oppression, setting themselves up as God, and then the answer to that is no, God reigns, the Lord reigns.
Yeah.
And this is ultimately what he's trying to do, trying to work with the people to bring a remnant through to that blessing. Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. What happens next then?
So we've got 3 more sections to
Okay.
take us to chapter 39. Chapter 28, we have some more warnings for Judah.
Okay.
So chapter 28 starts talking about the destruction of that northern kingdom, which will have just happened before the Assyrians come down into Judah and besiege Jerusalem. So it's a much more immediate. Look, you can see what's happened to the northern kingdom and the terrible things that have befallen them and the destruction there. So change your ways, return to me, because they're coming. It's a really immediate kind of threat. But despite that, verse 14 of chapter 28, therefore hear the word of the Lord, you scoffers who rule this people in Jerusalem, because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have an agreement. When the overwhelming whip passes through, it will not come to us. So the people in Jerusalem think, yeah, we're fine. We're the people of God. Nothing can happen to us. Therefore, verse 16, thus says the Lord, behold, I am the one who has laid as a foundation in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone of a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not be in haste. So even though there's going to be some cataclysm, there's still a foundation that remains from which there will be a rebuilding. And that's, again, might be familiar. It's picked up in the New Testament about Jesus as this cornerstone. Isn't it? So even though things look bleak, God's purpose will continue.
Yeah, there's an interesting phrase, isn't that? Making a covenant with death and with Sheol. We've made an agreement. So that's interesting, isn't it? They think that's what the covenant is going to be now, effectively. Yeah, interesting language. Okay, so that's a warning section. That's the feature of this then. It's very much look on your immediate horizon, look what's coming, but a promise of the perpetual covenant, the never-ending covenant from God. And then, so we've got one more section before we get to the historical bit, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, so chapters 32 to 35 is a much more hopeful little section. So after all that warning, a bit more hope. There's a king will reign in righteousness. There will be a restoration in which there will be righteousness. And then there's the famous chapter, Isaiah 35, about the wilderness, and the dry land shall be glad, the desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. And it talks about the eyes of the blind being opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. So lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. So waters breaking out in the wilderness, becoming a pool, blessings, fruitfulness, plenty, and all of that in Zion. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return. So captives returning, which was a very real thing in the time of Hezekiah. When the Assyrians left, the captives were able to return. But it's couched in this language, which, again, sounds very much, okay, we're replanting the Garden of Eden. It's that sort of language again.
Yeah, that really fits with that. Also, the parts of this chapter 35 seems to be quoted or at least alluded to in the Gospels about Jesus and are you the one who should come, or should we look for another? So all throughout, this is really interesting. All these very specific moments in the history of Isaiah and the kings and the reigns of those at that time, but then are taken and used in those different contexts. So that's quite a useful thing to spot. So yeah, very much the blessings in this section.
And then we're into the final little section of 4 chapters, which is this. It's not the sort of poetic prophecy, it's history. And it's almost identical to the record in the Second of Kings, chapters 18 through to 20. It has a lot of similar components to it. And it's about the history of what happened when Hezekiah was sick, when Jerusalem was besieged, and the Assyrians were inexplicably overcome by something, and they left. So Jerusalem was free. And then Hezekiah recovers. And so, although it gets to this real crisis point where everything seems like it's about to all fall apart and disappear, it then recovers from that. But we'll just link back to, we said when we looked at Isaiah chapter 7, this curious phrase about a virgin shall conceive. And Jewish writers, Jewish translators of the Hebrew into Greek use this word virgin. Why did they do that? We perhaps get a hint of that in Isaiah chapter 37 as part of this section. Isaiah, in response to a prayer from Hezekiah, because Hezekiah is desperate for relief from this crisis, he prays to God, and Isaiah comes back to Hezekiah with a message from God in chapter 37, verse 21. Then Isaiah, the son of Amos, sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because you have prayed to me concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria, this is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. She despises you, she scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. She wags her head behind you, the daughter of Jerusalem. So the city itself is described as this virgin daughter of Zion. So I think in the Jewish translators' minds, they were seeing in Isaiah 7, a virgin shall conceive, bring a son, and that will lead to blessing. They were saying it's Jerusalem is their picture of that kind of virgin that will be restored and spring back to life and or bring new life and be restored. So I thought that was an interesting, perhaps, reflection on that verse in Isaiah chapter 7.
Yeah, so that sort of seeing the nation, seeing the city as this kind of maiden, this virgin, which goes through this crisis, but that out of that emerges a period of blessing and restoration, which is like the conceiving of the virgin, which is a miraculous sign.
Yes. And when you look at the history of that time, the promise, the sign to Hezekiah that that God was with him, if you like, was that the Assyrians would leave, but the land is desolate. But then the sign is that the wilderness would bloom, that for 2 years, there would be a really plentiful harvest that would feed the people. And this would be an evidence of God being with them.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Paul. We've skipped through half of Isaiah very quickly. And maybe that's in not as much detail as you needed. But hopefully it's just given a flavour of it, I think, a flavour of what this is about, to just help you then approach the book, understand a little bit about its context, and then understand how we can make sense of the types of things that are being talked about, which is what it was all about. So that's hopefully been really helpful. Those different 7 aspects of prophetic writings that you've identified, Paul, we've gone through lots of those. We've seen language drawing on the holy mountain.
Yep.
The idea of the Eden place as this image, this prophetic picture of the future blessing of the covenant, creation and decreation, all those sorts of things. But it's all got a very specific context. But then, of course, these big themes then take it into bigger places throughout, which is really quite helpful.
Yeah, and I think it leaves us with a real deep assurance that however desperate and terrible things might look, God is still working in history, and it's moving forward. Things are moving forward towards an intended outcome. It's not giving us a detailed roadmap to that outcome, but it is giving us the assurance that God's perpetual covenant is going to reach the destination that he intends.
Yeah. Okay, very good. So throughout that, we've had a bit of a thunderstorm just here, and a downpour and all sorts of noise. I don't think it was quite overhead, otherwise I might have turned off. But there we go. Hopefully that's not come through too much on the recording. But we've seen the end of that and the blessings that are following now with calm, and the threat of war is gone, and the grass and the weeds might bloom more in the garden.
Yes, yeah, excellent.
And maybe some flowers
Excellent.
as well,
Yeah.
but we'll see. But now they've been well watered. So excellent. Thanks, Paul. We're going to continue with Isaiah. We'll look at the second part of Isaiah from chapter 40 onwards. So that's the plan. So stick with us. Hopefully it's helping you, encourage you to open the books of the prophets and maybe Isaiah itself, just to read through it and see what it has for you. So head over to biblefeed.org and find us on YouTube, Facebook, on different socials, and hopefully see you next time.